Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Melinda Nusafora. Saudi Arabia, Pakistan and Türkiye came together for the first time last week in a bid to develop closer defence cooperation. The delegations met in the Saudi capital, Riyadh, to discuss boosting defence trade, technology transfers and localising the production of defence hardware. The meeting comes as a follow-up to President Erdogan's tour of the Gulf last month, which focused on attracting foreign investment. Pakistan and Türkiye have had a long history of close defence ties. Earlier this month, Türkiye said talks were underway to include Pakistan in its domestic KAAN fighter jet project. The announcement was made during the launch of the fourth and final warship made under the joint Turkish-Pakistani program, MILGEM. Meanwhile, Ankara and Riyadh have resolved years of tension and restored strong diplomatic ties, inking billions of dollars worth of new trade deals. Baykar, Turkiye's domestic drone manufacturing company, recently signed its biggest export contract with Riyadh. And earlier this month, Saudi Arabia Military Industries also secured a pact with Baykar to localise the manufacturing of its drones. So what are the broader implications of this trilateral defence grouping? Well, joining me now from Islamabad is political analyst Hamza Rifat, and from Abu Dhabi, Suha Çabukçuoğlu. He's a senior researcher at the Trends Research Advisory. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us here on Straight Talk. Hamza, I want to ask you first, why do you think these countries are perceiving a greater need for defence cooperation?
Well, Melinda, I think it all boils down to the military-industrial complexes in all three countries. Now, we all know that Turkey, as well as Saudi Arabia, exhibit immense amount of influence in the Middle East, and Pakistan is also a regional power in South Asia. To maintain that influence, it's equally important to invest in those military-industrial complexes for greater need as far as economic stability of all three countries is concerned. Without that, it is very, very difficult for all these three countries to try and maintain that sense of balance. But I think that it's more or less about security perceptions. It's more to do with the fact that the domestic economies of each of these three countries would want to make sure that greater investments in these particular complexes can actually take place. And for that, this defense agreement and the defense cooperation between Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan can yield immense amounts of benefits for these particular complexes.
Suha, Hamza just pointed out economies there, and it raises a point that I'm curious about. Is this defence industry alliance to boost joint defence economies, or is there a perceived actual need for greater joint security and defence on the ground?
I agree with Hamza. I think it's to boost their defense economies and be able to act in a more autonomous fashion to reduce their reliance on, let's say, Western security guarantees. So there are geoeconomic reasons, a combination of strategic and economic factors, along with a keen interest to follow, technological advancements. If we might put a tag on it, we'd call it friend-shoring or ally-shoring. A popular term that's often used to denote de-risking by manufacturing and sourcing, from countries that face similar bottlenecks. Let's not also forget that, Gulf countries, their sovereign wealth funds are looking to diversify their portfolios, and Saudi Arabia has the largest one. So they try to increase non-oil trade and have longer-term horizons into more strategic partnerships rather than this transactionalism of buy and forget type deals. So those all feed into these, calculus behind the tripartite defense cooperation.
Mm-hmm. Hamza, Türkiye obviously has a strong domestic defence industry. Its export target in the sector is about $6 billion this year. But aside from sales, what's in it for Türkiye, do you think? What is Türkiye gaining from the alliance, and what do you think Pakistan is gaining from the alliance?
I think there's a lot to gain because of the very fact that when we talk about Pakistan and Turkey, we're talking about Baykar and Baykar's actual agreements with the Saudi Defense Ministry. And when we talk about those agreements, we're looking at the indigenization of drones or the UAVs. Obviously, we know for a fact that Baykar is known for producing excellent UAVs. And that would actually enable Turkey as well as Saudi Arabia to actually expand the defense cooperation in that sector. As far as Pakistan is concerned, this country has been under an economic turmoil for quite some time. It's also important to try and boost the artificial intelligence capacity within Pakistan, and for them to actually make sure that they can be a part of this tripartite agreement, to try and make sure that they can boost defense cooperation as well as artificial intelligence. That could result in a trickle-down effect on the local industries as well as local businesses. And that is something that Pakistan is actually eyeing for. You did rightly mention that Turkey's export from this is actually quite exponential, but at the very same time, Turkey has a lot to gain from the indigenization of drones, which would actually take place in Saudi Arabia. So this entire complex is a win-win situation for all three countries, and it can actually result in the particular dividends that can actually be required.
Suha, do you agree? Is it win-win, or is someone getting more out of this than the others?
It's a win-win, but there are comparative differences, between which side gets what. I mean, in terms of hedging against, say, for instance, Western defense companies' monopoly on supply chains and defense technology, yes, it does serve localization, knowledge transfer, and longer-term strategic partnership, as we mentioned. I think one of the major driving factors behind this rising defense cooperation is the quest to gain strategic autonomy, to be able to distribute risks by hedging against changes, both political and economic, especially, for instance, the upcoming US presidential elections next year. Middle powers like Turkey, Pakistan, and Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia as an example, have emerged as non-aligned or according to some multi-aligned powers adapting to a multipolar world as the global economy's center of gravity shifts to the Indo-Pacific region. Now, so when we look at actual defense investments and cooperation, for instance, Turkey has a multidimensional relationship with Pakistan going back much further. Starting with, the modernization of Pakistani F-16s. It also uses Akıncı and TB2 Baykar drones, and MILGEM corvettes, 4 of which have been released. The last one just recently in Karachi shipyard. So with Saudi Arabia, it's a more recent. But it's moving faster with the recent deal, as we all know, after President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's visit to the Gulf region between Baykar and Saudi to locally produce UAVs in the country.
Lucrative deal indeed. Hamza, do you foresee any particular country in the region, or perhaps more broadly, being concerned or uncomfortable by this defence tripartite?
I would have actually said that prior to the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. I think that would have resulted in the threat perceptions being augmented in the Middle East. And we all know for a fact that Saudi Arabia's long-standing rivalry with Iran, as well as Turkey's differences, and Pakistan's inability to actually expand its ingress in the Middle East because of Iran-Saudi tensions, has had an impact on military cooperation. But this time around, with the softening of the tone in Tehran, as well as Riyadh, greater, you could say, defense cooperation based upon this very fact, that would not necessarily be a zero-sum game in the Middle East, where one country could actually perceive a threat from the other. And I think this would actually enable all three countries to actually focus on the actual areas, which are artificial intelligence, technology transfers, as well as military cooperation, as well as R&D, research and development. This can actually result in that same trickle-down effect that I alluded to earlier, where each of the countries can actually look at military military cooperation not from a 16th century perspective, or a 2023 perspective. And the other aspect is hybrid warfare. Hybrid warfare is having a significant impact on the economies of all three countries. And if you take a look at the broader region as well. So if you look at the recent committee that actually transpired in Riyadh, there was a lot of focus on making sure that technology transfers, R&D, and hybrid warfare and greater, you could say, cybersecurity threats can actually be addressed. And this is where I feel that each country has a lot to benefit from this. But this wouldn't have been the case had Iran and Saudi Arabian rivalry continued for as long as it did.
And Suha, what do you think? Do you think that there are any specific regional security concerns that this group could be looking to address?
I agree with Hamza. If it was 2 or 3 years ago, I would say Iran, but no longer. Let's remember that Pakistan is close to China, which in turn is a major supporter of Iran economically, and both, and at the least, all three countries are actually members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. With the Saudi-Iran diplomatic reconciliation through China's mediation, I would say that threat perception is more subdued. I wouldn't think it's against any particular regional actor. It's more, as I said, against external factors, more unsystemic risks like Russia-Ukraine war, or any other supply chain bottleneck, and more longer-term onshoring and friendshoring that will sustain technological advancement, but also know-how transfer and, as Hamza mentioned, also investment in information technology, especially AI and robotics, because robotic warfare is the name of the game for hybrid fifth-generation warfare.
Suha, do you think Turkey and Saudi Arabia, they have had a troubled relationship in the past? Do you see this as further evidence that they are now back on track?
Yeah, we could say that. Both countries have an interest in de-escalation and economic pragmatism rather than confrontation, because survival in this, multi-layered, unstable world order necessitates, flexibility to compartmentalize and reprioritize policy agendas, and a refocus on converging interests rather than those that set them apart. So I think that's what's driving the current momentum of reconciliation and diplomatic fence-mending, an instance of which is this defense cooperation agreement between the two countries.
Hamza Rifat and Shuha Çubukçuoğlu, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise here on Straight Talk.